The Nigerian electricity market has been unbundled, and with the latest Electricity Reform Act, regulatory reform control and control of the electricity market has been handed to the subnationals. Enugu's electricity regulators, the Enugu State Electricity Regulatory Commission, announced a reduction of the band air tariff for its electricity consumers within their regulatory control, a situation that has generated varying reactions even from Nerc and GenCos. What is the true position of the law on this? And do we expect to have a new tariff regime from August 1 as announced by the EERC? This is the Eastern Eye. I am Alex Obodo. Eastern Eye, a program that X-rays the political, social, and economic developments around us. Joining me tonight is Professor Sam Amadi. He's the director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thoughts, and also he was the former chairman of the National Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining me tonight on the Eastern Eye.
Thank you, my brother Alex.
So, I'm sure you've been watching closely everything that has happened. The Enugu Electricity Regulatory Commission says that they looked at certain dynamics supplied by Main Power Electricity Distribution Company in Enugu here in determining the tariff reduction that is supposed to come on stream tomorrow. That's August 1. What's your take, first of all, on this? Is the EERC within its powers in taking this step?
Well, thank you. Obviously, they're within their power. Whether the step they took is the right one is a different thing. The Electricity Act and the Constitution authorizes states to effectively self-regulate, provided they satisfy some minimum conditions. And those conditions are first they have to enact a law, constitute an electoral commission. And so, legally speaking, they are within their powers to design and implement a distribution retail tariff, which is what they have done. Then the question around did they do the right thing? Did they do it in the right way? Are there issues remain? But legality, they act within their power. That's what they are primarily set up to do. When the state set up a regulatory commission, it's primarily to set tariffs, and that's what ENUGU has done.
Okay, now let's talk about the process. Let's talk about the timing, and let's talk about whether the procedures were fully adhered to.
Well, first, let's talk about procedure. The work of ENUGU, the first thing ENUGU Regulatory Commission does is to develop a methodology, and I think they did. Now, that methodology ought to have been developed in consultation with the operator, in this case, Main Power, or whatever they call itself, which is a subsidiary of the SY operator in Enugu EDC. So I would assume that it's elementary. They would have done that consultation. But evidently, that we didn't hear about any complaint around the methodology itself. So, and I don't expect most of the guys who are in Enugu are people who work with me, my staff, some of them from NEC. So they are conversant, I would assume. They are, of course. Okabiela is their strong guy from NEC. They are very conversant with methodology. So I would assume that they adopted a proper methodology, designed following NEC's methodology. The question then would be, did they follow their methodology in arriving at this controversial tariff? From what my feedback I've got from them, a couple of them, particularly Engineer Okabiela, is that they follow that methodology. The problem is that the revenue requirement, what we call revenue requirement, which is every industry is regulated. There's an amount of money which the regulator agrees that you need to run the industry. So let's assume what will happen is that the EERC would have written to Main Power to ask them to file in their revenue requirement, how much they will use to serve people in Enugu State. Now, that will include, of course, the cost of power, which is the generation wholesale price, because Main Power does not generate the power themselves. And in this market today, that price will be the price fixed by NERC. So NERC, because the generators are not licensed by EERC, they don't have any generator right now that is their own, meaning that there's no power company that's in ENUGU licensed to generate to feed. So ENUGU is going to rely, for now, from the 70-something megawatts daily or so that we receive from the grid. So that pricing that NERC has done, which is the wholesale, ENUGU, my information is that ENUGU took it, they didn't revise it, but they have no power. It's locked in contract. It's a PPA price, meaning power purchase agreement. NERC has signed, the bulk trader has signed on behalf of the generators to vest to DISCO. So that's the power that ENUGU gets. So that is it. They also will not change much the transmission cost, which is ENUGU is not the transmission cost is already fixed by NERC, and the transmitter is still the national transmitter, the national, the TCN, the Transmission Company of Nigeria. So ENUGU will take that component or ought to take that component because it's not subject to their own review. What now changes, the same mainframe will now file to ENUGU the cost they will use to serve the people in ENUGU. That's the distribution cost, the retail cost. That's the third segment that make up the tariff. Generation, transmission, and the distribution. Now, this is where the problem starts. Maybe what I heard is that ENUGU, manpower, whatever, spent, let's say 10 billion as what they will need, 100 billion to serve the customers in ENUGU. ENUGU requests for breakdown, and manpower sends a breakdown that ENUGU goes through and comes to, let's say, 80 billion, not 100 billion. So ENUGU DISCO uses 80 billion to run their tariff. So at that point, there's a discrepancy. So that's one aspect. So the second issue we hear is, so that means the tariff that the revenue requirement ENUGU approves will be less than the revenue requirement that maybe the DISCO at first sight, at first moment, sent as their cost. So tariffs are cost reflective, not in a notional sense. There's no price that is cost reflective. The cost reflective tariff is a tariff that allows an efficient operator to recover prudent and efficient costs. So it might be that ENUGU did not consider some cost prudent. It might be that ENUGU's valuation of the costs is less than what main power would ordinarily think they're entitled. That could be one source of controversy. Again, we hear that, of course, the so-called Band A customers. Now, nothing says ENUGU DISCO must accept the nomenclature of Band A, Band B, Band C. So if ENUGU decides to, change those categorization, because even when I was in NEC, we never had Band A, Band B, Band C. We had the normal residential customer 1 and 2, 3, commercial customer 1 and 2, 3, industrial customer, and special customers. So that was the classification. But NEC now creates this, which I have criticized myself, that it doesn't sound nice to me. But again, they did it to respond to cost devaluation, interest rate escalation that increased the debt of the industry. So they try to get more money from customers who can pay under the notion they're going to get more power, more hour of service. In many cases, that didn't happen. But that's a different issue. But the point is that ENUGU seemed to have reduced the cost, the price that so-called Band A pay. And the DISCOs are worried. So this is a crisis that can be handled. And the only way to handle it is to go back and look at the methodology and ask ENUGU, show us how you arrive at your tariff. And if they followed the methodology, and the methodology is, is okay, as I presume it is, and the costs that are reasonable and proper costs have been covered, then there's no issue here. I can understand DISCOs worried. The DISCOs would like to have more money all the time. And some DISCOs out there would fear that some states will follow ENUGU methodology and perhaps they won't get worried altogether. So it's a dispute. It's a dispute, but the way to resolve it is through the science of tariff making, to ask three basic questions. Is the methodology right, the right methodology. If you see us, you tick it. Did the ENUGU apply that methodology very well, accurately? Yes, you tick it. Is the revenue that they are projecting reasonable and the right revenue required for the operation? If you see us, then bingo, that's correct.
You know, Professor Amadi, I have to admit I was present during the when they were presenting this methodology to the stakeholders, even before it was approved. I was there, and we've interviewed the officials of the EERC, and they said that they obtained the necessary information from the GenCo, that's the distribution company, I beg your pardon, the main power here in Enugu, to arrive at the figures they used to arrive at the current tariff. So, but the question here is that when NERC responded, they kept saying that the EERC has no rights to do this and to do that. Is there an issue of having no rights here? Because that's part of what the NERC position was from their response. And even some of the GenCos and some of the stakeholders in the power sector were responding as if the EERC shouldn't be doing this at all.
NERC is wrong. I mean, look, let's be clear here. If EERC has every right to do tariff, that's why, you see, my problem is that Nigerians sometimes are not diligent and rigorous people. NERC knew all along that this is what the act says. NERC itself was gleefully signing off approvers, giving states so-called authorization to get out of the grid, to get out of the instead of their own market. So what do they expect? The most elementary work of a regulator of any electricity market is to make tariffs, QED. One, if next argument is that ENUGU has altered generation component, because the power that EEDC will serve, or main power will serve in ENUGU, will not be manufactured by EED. So it's a power they buy from a national generator through a system operator. In that case, ENUGU shouldn't alter because it's a contract. They only have to, but it's like, look, you are going, let me give you an example that makes sense now. Assuming that you're going to run a bakery in ENUGU, but the flour is nationally distributed by Nigerian flour mill, and the price for the bag of flour is $10. That $10 is also $10 in Kano, $10 in Lagos, $10. And one ENUGU said now wants to set his own bakery, but he's buying that same flour. You cannot then ask your customers to pay anything less than that $10. So $10 will be carried over because it's not a variable cost. You can't vary it. It's not in your power. ENUGU has to respect the wholesale tariff because it's a tariff that it's a taker. It doesn't change it. It doesn't produce the power in ENUGU. It's a power that there's a contract for 20 years, 25 years between the federal government and the generator. And therefore, if ENUGU takes that power at less than that amount, then the DISCO will have a shortfall. So once the DISCO is paying that 25 naira, ENUGU must agree. The ENUGU must take transmission. So if ENUGU has taken transmission, has taken that, then nothing concerns NERC with the tariff, because the tariff belongs to ENUGU. And by the way, even if ENUGU does not take these tariffs, the wholesale and the distribution and the transmission, what's next business? The industry will collapse in ENUGU. The electricity sector will collapse in ENUGU, meaning that the main power will not be able to serve their customer, recover their money, and be in business. So ENUGU electricity market will collapse. Not NERC. NERC has no more regulatory jurisdiction to. NERC is crying more than the bereaved. He has no business.
So it's so it's an Obasaraha situation. Obasaraha.
Yes, as long as what NERC can do is, if ENUGU is not, main power is not able to pay for the cost of taking that power, NERC can then challenge them not to have access to power. So the DISCOs will now, the GenCos will now say, we will not sell power to ENUGU mainframe because they can't pay us and move. So it's contractual. That's the point I'm making. at this point, the reasonable thing is ENUGU will recognize all the wholesale prices and the transmission prices. And then if their own final price is different because their cost is different. For example, in a real market, you won't pay the same electricity in ENUGU as you pay in Kano. Density is different, geography is larger, cost is larger. To serve customers in ENUGU will be cheaper than to serve customers in Kano, all things being equal. So you're going to have maybe a smaller distribution network to pay for. ENUGU is a small enclave, so to say, okay? Compare with Kano, or compare with Kaduna, or compare with a place like maybe Niger State that is very large. They're going to lay so many lines. Those are cost components that are going to change. Again, ENUGU might be, labor might be cheaper or might be more expensive than ENUGU. So the disco in ENUGU will pay more for operational cost, paying salaries, than somebody in Zamfara will pay. Maybe an average salary of administrative staff in ENUGU could be, let's say, 200,000 or 150,000. But that's in Kano, it could be 80,000. So you can see that the cost profile of each state will change.
Yeah, that's exactly the point of EERC. That they are saying that, well, based on what is obtainable here, and from the calculations and from the figures from manpower, that this is what the tariff is supposed to be, and not anything higher. So is there a problem with tariffs coming down in Nigeria? What is that tug of war? Because what we see here is that it looks like that you have a set of people who are bent on the tariffs not coming down.
Well, tariffs don't have to come down kind of, whimsically. You don't just bring them down. It's not artificially set up. So look at the point. ENUGU has not got any tariff before. If ENUGU had a tariff, let's say 20 naira per kilowatt hour, and then it comes down, then you can ask ENUGU, what has changed? What variable has changed that makes it come down? I'll be surprised if a tariff comes down in Nigeria today because of the inflationary trends. But this is the first tariff. So it's not like a tariff coming down. It's they're setting a tariff based on the parameters obtainable in ENUGU. For example, if manpower has only 30 or 100 transformers and 5 substations, for example, and let's say in Imo, EEDC, the state operator in Imo, has 300 transformers and 10 substations. Their costs are different. So these costs are not notional things you import from air. And therefore, if electricity is 2 naira in Imo, cost efficient, there has to be 2 naira in ENUGU, cost efficient. It might not necessarily be so. So that's one point. So the first question is, have you covered the real costs that ENUGU manpower has invested? Capital costs, operational costs, they used to run their place, their staff, their level, the vehicles, the fueling of vehicles and repairs, the computers. These are all part of the cost, the operational maintenance, variable and fixed operational OMN, operational maintenance costs. Have you factored them accurately? If it's yes, then it doesn't matter that the tariffs come down or tariffs are lower than you have a national average. That's why many states are going to have more or less the national average. So Nigeria has a tariff benchmark. I predict that some states, if they do it right, will be higher than Nigeria's average, except the state governors intervene through fiscal policy. So there are 3 components here. The first component is the methodology, the idea that the tariffs to make sure that this sector does not collapse. Tariffs should be proportionate to cost and allowable profit and replacement costs. So the tariffs should not be forced to come down so that to prove that ENUGU is doing well. That would destroy this sector long term. And I want to say this, that the regulators themselves should be talking to people like us who are experts regularly to guide them. And that's what practice I told the governor of Afia. That's why I'm happy to work with them as chair of their advisory council. That's the kind of things to come. We advise them.
All right. So, but typically we have a situation where that new tariff, that tariff they are set is supposed to take effect on the 1st of August, and that is on Friday. So do you see that happening? Because I'm looking at the social media handles of Main Power. I haven't seen any notice there that they are willing to effect any changes in their tariff.
Well, let me tell you my honest truth. I think that maybe we're not ready for this transition, even at the national level. It doesn't seem to me as if we're ready yet. So it might be that it may not happen. It might be that it may not happen because a lot of they're still fighting, and the NERC is trying to fight, and too many issues because the federal government itself did not do the work they ought to do. We didn't transition this thing well. We didn't create a process for learning by doing, so that the states themselves will hold their hands. It just, Nigerian thing, nobody sits back for rigor. People just, all kinds of consultants. In fact, ENUGU is even ahead of the curve. ENUGU, in my view, is doing far better in terms of the quality. They're not yet there. I think they should have had more stronger external support. They should have got more consultation, but they are doing better, in my view, with their law, with the process that they're doing. But still, I think that Nigeria is a society that pretends to know more than it knows. Everyone's an expert. People are run up and down. So I predict there will be a lot of collapse of state electricity market. That's my view. Few states will get it right. And that's what I told the governor of Afia, that look, let's not be under any romantic thinking. They will collapse because experts with no expertise are everywhere creating a regulatory market. If I was a president, I would make haste slowly. I would guide the process more. I will provide robust support and make sure that we are seeing, doing scenario analysis. What would result if this, what would go wrong? What could go wrong? And then we put our hands together, hands on, and guide. Look, if the nation has not delivered reform, how do you think states can do it easily? So I'm not saying, look, the ENUGU is breaking free, ENUGU is freedom. No, ENUGU is actually in a situation where they have to be very more thorough, they have to be very more rigorous, they have to ask more questions, they have to make sure they get it right. Because if you don't attract investment, if you don't create the product in a sustainable manner, you don't have a market. I mean, 75 megawatts from the grid is not what ENUGU used to run a regulatory commission. I've told the chairman that several times. But it's a good start. Then you need to sustain the learning. And that's what's missing. The learning component is missing. And we finished learning too early in Nigeria. Even globally, regulators, I can speak now, probably I'm the most informed in this country. Not just studying it, but 5 years ahead of the agency. I can say authoritatively, and teaching it since I left, that we are still far from the learning curve. Yeah, there are a few smart people here and there, but the institutional learning is still low level. That's why we're struggling. That's why the ministers, they didn't know what they're doing. If I was a minister of power in this country, and this act has to come, I would have day one foreseen this crisis and set up a process of problem solving, of hand-holding the states as they build every step on the way. We guide them, we monitor, we review, we ask questions, what could go wrong, because this could actually create crisis for the Nigerian system if many states go wrong and there's a collapse.
All right, I have to thank you for this. We'll take a break, Professor Amadi. When we come back from that break, a lot has been happening in Nigeria regarding identity politics. And going through your social media handle, you've written copiously on that subject. So when we come back, I'll be getting your insights on identity politics and the Igbo question. Join us after the break. Back to the Eastern Eye here on Afia TV, a program that X-rays the political, social, and economic developments around us. My name is Alex Obodo. I'm reaching you live here from ENUGU. And I still have with me, joining me from Abuja, Professor Sam Amadi. Prof, it looks like there is another trend. And I've read some of the things you've written, and there's been a spree of renaming anything that is Igbo, especially in Lagos. If it's a street, it's renamed. If it's anything that has Igbo name on it, it has been renamed. I think it's a process that is ongoing. And then it's filtering into, a lot of people believe it is a well thought out political move. And identity politics is raising the tension in Lagos and elsewhere in Nigeria. How will Ndibo navigate this? Has it come to the point where, okay, Ndibo shouldn't just aspire to do anything? Ndibo shouldn't say that they want to be this or they want to be that. What should Ndibo be doing at this point?
The sense of memory. I made a point. That was the theme of my lecture. I also observed that remembering is surviving. Echosana, Cheta, that's what as our parents called their children those names. Echosana, Echefula, Echosana, Cheta. So we've gone to this part before. Now, but there are 3 key points to make. The first is that the Igbos and the Yorubas are not fighting in real sense or quarreling. I mean, this is a simulated and structured conflict. And it dates to, the more violent form of it dates to 2023 election. And it's all crafted by Tinubu's political footmen who needed to secure political base and saw the P2P movement, and of course, Igbos are also part of that, as an effort to dethrone them, destroy the fiefdom as you like. But it has now become weaponized as all hate speech and narratives get weaponized, politicized, escalated, and then journeymen, people join it and promote it. And so this new wave of Igbo backlash and anti-Igbo virus is dangerous because we're living in an age where narration has taken over facts and truths. And so all the Igbo efforts, Igbo historic achievement and legacy Lagos could be whitewashed and look like Igbos are either provocateurs, troublemakers, or lightweights in terms of development. And so, but some important, of course, Yoruba people are also speaking out against it. I think Fashola made some point about, not necessarily from the Igbo perspective, or about decoloring Lagos, making Lagos look, defacing the history of Lagos and making it less of a national, importance. And that's the cut back to this, that the more you remove all those names, so you make Lagos less of, you diminish Lagos in its importance. But as a pattern to Ndibo, I've always taken this view that the Igbos have they have a burden they carry, the burden of national aspiration that oftentimes the love for nation that's not often requited, not often paid back. And so people see Igbos as perhaps trying to dominate, and the question around indigen citizenship has now been made to be a question of Igbo dominance. But again, it's central to democratic citizenship and the notion of a nation. If you go back to history, you see that the Zik and other Igbo influence or Igbo actors played key role in pushing the idea of a Nigerian state that embodies a civic space of equality, a civic space of transcendency, where people, though they come with different identities, transcend into a national identity and consciousness. That perhaps is a very modular and undying expression of Igbo democratic expression for Nigeria. And maybe it builds from our idealism, our natural proclivity to idealism, the notion that we can actually be one people, we can actually have equity and egalitarianism, we can actually have liberty for all. And if you look at these democratic values, they subject this form of idealism and universalism. So the Igbos continuously, get punished for advocating for a national survival, a national transformation, a national development built around a sense of egalitarianism, a sense of equality and a sense of transcendence. We are a people called Nigeria, and therefore we can feel safe, feel equal in Nigeria space, and that becomes the Igbo quest to dominate the Igbo imperial project, and we get punished. Now, but how should the Igbo? The most important thing is not what people do to us, it's what we do to ourselves. What I reject and what I try to say is that the Igbos must remain modular in expressing that fact that wherever they are, they want to belong, and they have to demand that they belong, and they have to fight to belong, and they have to reject every suggestion that they should run away, they should wither, they should accept a lower degree of Nigerianness than any other Nigeria. And that's, for some of us, that's part of the P2P project. It's not necessarily that, you must win or must not win. It's that if an Igbo man is competent and wanted by other Nigerians to file for presidency, he shouldn't, because people will say Igbo man again, now decide to be vice. If he wants to be vice, that's fine. If an Igbo man wants to be legislator, he should. If an Igbo man considers himself, qualified to run for anything in Nigeria or any part of Nigeria, he owes it to his ancestors, to the God who has made him Igbo man, to stand up and offer himself to his countrymen. Democracy requires that they may accept or reject you. Like I said in my post, I says, if your countrymen accept you, glory be to God. If your countrymen rejects you, which is what democracy requires or allows, then you reject yourself. So what does it mean to Ijonwegide? If Igbos at any point accept the blackmail of history and the narration and the memory, distorted memory and distorted narrative, to see themselves as aggressors, as people who have sinned against humanity in the Nigerian context, and therefore sentenced by gods to subservience, to second-class citizenship, to not aspiring or to aspire a limited breadth because my neighbors will feel frightened. If they accept those postulations, then they have done the very thing that our father said we should never do. Ijonwegi, self-abnegation, self-rejection. And that's the point. That does not foreclose strategic alignments, strategic retreats. It does not foreclose all levels of deliberations and compromises for the common good. But what I want to foreclose is the self-rejection that expresses itself is as as we can't do this, as we shouldn't raise our voice so that our neighbors don't get frightened. When raising our voice is decent, civilized, and proper, not that we should become swashbuckling and torpedo and throw that and smash things and have no emotional intelligence. No. But that in all our emotional intelligence and all our strategic retreats and all our compromises and all our meanderings, we have to stand for that equal dignity and stand for that clear and strong voice that says, I am, and I am like another person. That says, I have a right to be here. I have a right to express my own view. I have a right to be listened to and to listen to others and to be listened to as I listen to others. If others can lead, then we can lead. If we can vote a Northerner with 80% under PDP and vote for maybe a Southwesterner and South-South, we can as well ask others to vote for us. That is irreducible minimum of what I think should be the Igbo response to all these crises. Yes, we need to be strategic. We need to think around how to repair relationships, build bridges, handshake across the Niger, across the desert, and so on and so forth. Those are what we should be doing. But we proceed from the perspective of self-identification, that we are, and we do not have to continue to hide that we are. And that's part of what the Igbo elites have failed to do. Maybe it's difficult to get over the traumas and the violations of the Civil War. But the new generation of Igbo demand that our leaders, as governors, as legislators, have an unequivocal stance on Igbo identity and dignity. That's really what it's all about. The enemies can hate us, can do things, but we shouldn't hate ourselves. We shouldn't do things against ourselves.
And I want people to any political office, they disappear at the moment they get to Abuja, or they become unrecognizable. Do you think that this is the case with a lot of politicians from Igbo extraction? Is there a problem with going to Abuja and losing your identity or that particular mien you're supposed to exude as an Igbo man who should be an Igbo leader? The arguments are now rife as to whether you should be addressed as a leader when you just go to Abuja and forget everyone in the southeast.
I think it's a complex problem, and there's a demand and supply of authenticity. Look, Igbo politics is notoriously externally determined. We don't have, because we are diaspora people, maybe, most of our brain power is outside the Igbo land. Most of our active force, the youth force, is outside the Igbo land. Look, it would be nice if I was with you in ENUGU in the studio saying this. It would have been nice after the studio, so young people meet me in Zika Avenue or meet me in Wedra Road, whatever. I said, yeah, this was powerful. How do we, further expand this? But here I'm in Abuja. So Tinubu, before he came to Abuja as president, lived in Lagos. Think about it. He could host in one evening Yinka Odumake, an activist, host in the same evening the CEO of Glow, host in the same evening a journalist from Punch, all in Lagos. The same with other Yoruba leaders. They mostly live Obasanjo. So, but we are the only people. We are our best and brightest live outside the region. So it has impact. First, our politics has no depth. It has no mass-based, element. So all our big guys who are going to re-election probably come for primaries, use their money, buy the tickets, and go back, and then wait for election and win. So there's no. Southeast is politically low energy. Civil society, we have the leading civil society advocates in Nigeria as Southeast people, but they're all in diaspora. Clem Nwanko, Sam Amadi, Chichiro Denkalo, Victoria Oheri, Okenwanko, everybody. They will keep some satellite posts in the Southeast. In the last 2 years, I've been doing all my work mostly in the Southeast in order to ignite and give support. So these are things that will not cut the eyes. So we need to come to a point where we can create a new politics so that our leaders are persons who are part of collective community struggle for authenticity. And then they emerge. We have governors who are smart people, but look at their profile. They're all foreigners, largely. Whether it's ENUGU governor, smart guy, entrepreneurial, but Lagos-based, Afia, Imo. So you have not had a governor who lived in the East, global citizen, but rooted in a movement, in civil society, in structure, in the Southeast. So that's the first cause. Rootless leaders, they're not rooted. And their persona is not defined by that struggle to uphold our authenticity. That's the supply side. The demand side is that our people are also not keen about, engaging this process. After election, they go away. How many civil society groups are every day pressing the governor, talking to him, meeting him, providing ideas, shaping him to engage with this? We are people at war. We should be having the time. Look at what we have Simon Bakwe, for example. Forget infrastructure, the cultural structuring, infrastructure he created, the idea he pushed, the authenticity, the fact that he could engage and fight MPL, Ndegro, and cry. Because he grew up in Aba, a lawyer who took up the challenge of Igbo, about property and all the violations. So it defined him. Emma Akpara, a missionary doctor in the eastern Nigeria there, at home, brought these experts and they're thinking authentically about how to make this region grow. We need to get back to the same level of authentic leadership. That's what's missing. And again, most of our leaders, unfortunately, are what we call in this critical discourse, comprador bourgeois. They are people who either are made by it. See, I probably to tell you that without Sokoto, without the North, I wouldn't have been made. He's telling you his allegiance. So they are more concerned because our people don't have the capacity. Our put is not enough to throw up leaders and bring them down. They find their, bearing and courage in Bodilon or in Sokoto, Asadibo land. That's what they are saying. That's why they go to Abuja. They say they go to Abuja and they disappear. Even those ones in Abuja who are in government houses are not coming out, are not, because their source of power is not people in the southeast. Those who are smart among them are creating that power base with their people. I can single out someone like Ote, in my view, is doing a lot in terms of trying to win a populist base to anchor transformative leadership. So Southeast has a lot of work to do. And by the grace of God, one of these days, we're going to have 3 or 5 governors, legislators who have this bearing, orientation, and who understand that we are in a situation of war. This is a different kind of war. The war of self-expression, the war of self-discovery, the war of contestation, the war of changing narrative about Nigeria and us, the war of shifting the relationship between Nigeria and the Igbo, shifting it back to that of self-respect, self-accommodation, and the Nigeria will now accept that the Igbos are not now aggressors nor victims anymore. They're just co-equal citizens who have a right to be different, who have a right, like other people, to quarrel, so that if there's an Igbo criminal in anywhere, it will not be a way of stigmatizing the Igbo, just like a Yoruba criminal does not stigmatize Yoruba. We know the guy who's fighting for Yoruba nation, what's his name? Sunday Igboho. Nobody has tarnished the Yoruba race. Nobody is seeing Tinubu's presidency from the fear that Igboho may happen. But people say, oh, Peter, oh, maybe IPOP. That's the social psychology that needs to be changed for Igbo to be truly free in Nigeria.
I have to thank you so much, Professor Sam Amadi, the director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Thank you so much for your insights and perspectives on the Eastern Eye tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And that's the Eastern Eye tonight. Do join us tomorrow for another episode of the program. My name is Alex Obodo. Good night.